gives us permission today to ask the question, why? Sometimes we're afraid to ask that question, why? You know, when we were growing up, elders would always say, don't question God. God knows better. Well, that's true. God does know better, and we trust God. But sometimes it takes us a little bit of time to get there. And so that question, why, that arises in our heart, it's like, Lord, I want to know. Help me to understand better what your plan is. Help me to see your plan. So I ask you, Lord, why? Why do things have to be the way that they are? There's a freedom that comes when you ask the question, why? Because when we see trouble all around, and I'm not just talking about troubles in the world or troubles in our nation, we also can look at troubles in our own personal life and in our own families. When we don't ask the question why, stress, anger, fear can build up inside of us because we're trying to not ask that question. So it churns around inside of us. And a lot of times when something is eating away at us on the inside, it comes out in other ways than in what we're really concerned about. We may become angry and become short with other people because we're holding this tension inside of us. But I think if we sometimes just take a little bit of time and sit in the presence of God and say, why, oh Lord? Sometimes that's the only thing that you can do in the world today, in our country, is just shake your head and say, why, oh Lord? How did we get to be where we are today? As I say, there's a freedom that comes with that. And then I explore. And then I ask God to show me, oh Lord, help me to look at things not only as I see them, but help me to look at them as you see them. Now, if you notice, God's answer to Habakkuk in the reading today was a very beautiful passage that says, God says to us through the prophet, I have not forgotten you. I have not turned my back on you. I am listening to you. I do see what you see. And I want to assure, don't think it's hopeless. No, the vision, God's plan, it still has its time. And it's pressing forward to fulfillment. It's pressing forward against the evil and the cruelty of this world. It's pushing it back little by little and inch by inch. Wait for it. If it's delayed, don't give up. Wait for it. And it will not disappoint. That could become my daily prayer every day. Just to remember that the Lord is at work and the Lord is working things out. What it requires and what God is telling the prophet Habakkuk and what he also tells his disciples in the gospel is that we need faith. But I'd like to unpack for you a little bit more about that word faith. You know, I don't want faith for us to be just a cliche that we say, oh, keep the faith. Well, if you just have faith, things are going to work out. We say that all the time, and sometimes we say it because we don't know what else to say, or a person sharing with us their troubles makes us uncomfortable, and so we say, well, just have faith. But I'd like to suggest to you today that faith is much deeper than that. That faith is a conscious and intentional choice that we make every day. That I will look at the world not as I do with my own eyes, but I will ask the Lord to help me see things as He sees things. That I will look upon the world with the eyes of faith. That I'll look upon things with hope. Now, by hope, I don't mean just being optimistic or wearing rose-colored glasses or just figuring, well, everything's going to be okay. Hope is believing in the promises of God. God is faithful, we say, and God is faithful because God is true to his word. And he has promised us that he will never forsake or abandon us. And so I'm living in faith. So faith is a conscious decision to trust in God's words. Faith is also a relationship with God. In 2 Timothy, our second reading, there's a verse that was not included in our selection today, but St. Paul says, I trust because I know the one in whom I have put my faith. I know the one in whom I have put my faith. I have a friend of mine who likes to say, you know, I didn't just meet God yesterday. We've been knowing each other for a long time. We have a relationship with God. You know, every so often you have to sit down and think about the ways that God has been there for you in the past. You have to recall those times when God made a way for you when there seemed to be no way. You have to remember those times when he opened a door. Those times when you didn't know what you were going to do, but God worked it out. Those times when you thought that you had fallen and failed completely, but then you realized that God had picked you up and set you on your way. That relationship that we have with God, that knowledge and that experience of God gives us hope for the present, and it gives us hope for the future. St. Paul says to Timothy in the second reading, you've got to fan those flames into fire. You know, imagine, a fireplace or a potbelly stove or a campfire. When I was a little kid, in our house, we used to have a coal-burning furnace. It was down in the basement. It was this big old thing that had, when I was a little kid, I thought it was a monster. I was sure that there was a monster in the basement of the house because it had these big pipes going out from it, and it had this fire in his belly. But I remember that every morning my father had to go down and he had to stroke the coals to get the flame to come up again in order to heat the house. You have to do that in a fireplace. Sometimes there's just glowing coals, but you have to take the poker and push them around a bit and maybe put another log on the fire, and the flames rise up. That's what our faith is like. Our faith is like glowing coals in our being, in ourself. And God gives us the gift of those burning coals. But we have to receive the gift, and we have to activate the gift. So we have to take the poker of faith and make those flames shoot up. That's what faith is. Faith is that fire that's burning inside of us, that gives us, as St. Paul says, not a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit of love, a spirit of self-control, and a spirit of truth. Faith is a relationship that we have with God, and it's an intentional decision on our part to walk with God each day, not to be overwhelmed by all the messages that we hear, TV, social media, doomsday messages, but to trust God and to walk in his way. And faith is not only just trusting, it's also action. That's what Jesus says in the gospel today. The disciples ask for an increase in faith. Jesus says, well, you do have faith. Even if you have a little bit of faith, you have enough faith because God is going to make that faith work for you. But he said, when you serve the Lord, don't be looking for a reward. Don't be looking for recognition. Don't be looking for a trophy. Don't be looking to have a story in the newspaper about you. Just do what you do for the Lord, because it is a prize enough to be in the Lord's service. The gospel story where Jesus says, it kind of shocks us a little bit. He says, just say that we are worthless with servants, and we've only done what we were supposed to do. I always think of, sometimes you might see a story on the news of a good Samaritan. Maybe there's a house fire, and the neighbor next door sees the flames, and he races out, might be in the middle of the night. He bangs on the door of the house to wake up the family, and they get out of the house, but then they realize somebody is left behind, and he goes charging into that house, and he comes out carrying a child, and the news reporter is there with the microphone saying, so how do you feel being a hero? And more often than not, the person says, I'm not a hero. I just did what anybody else would do. That's being a true servant of the Lord. Serving God is enough of a reward. I'd like to say that we saw a good servant of the Lord this week in Pope Leo. My heart was dancing and singing when he said, if you say that you're pro-life, but you're in favor of capital punishment, I don't know how much pro-life you are. And if you say you're pro-life, but you support the inhuman immigration policies of the United States, I don't know how you can say you're pro-life. He stood up and said, that being for life, being for the dignity of the human person, is every moment of life. It's not just birth, but it's also health care for that child who's born. It's also education for that child that's born. It's also a roof over their head and food on their table and opportunity in their life. That's what it means to be pro-life. That's what it means to be servants of the Lord. So I was so proud of Pope Leo when he stood up and said that, because we need voices, servants of the Lord who will speak up against the injustices that we see. How are we going to be servants of the Lord? Well, I can suggest to us one thing that we all can do. Everybody can do this. I suggest that we can be servants of the Lord by making sure that we all vote. We have an election on Saturday. We just finished early voting yesterday, but there is an election next Saturday. It's a small election, is a judgeship and some referendum questions. And I think the danger is